Today's topic is the hierarchy of life. That is how life is organized. We're going to start with the tiny atoms that make up any piece of matter and end with the most inclusive level, the biosphere, which includes all living and non-living things on the entire Earth. The hierarchy of life is how biologists organize different levels of life based on how complex they are. Atoms make up the least complex level in biology. Atoms are tiny. They are the smallest, most fundamental unit of matter. You may have seen this depiction of an atom consisting of a nucleus in the center, surrounded by electrons revolving around it. When two or more atoms join, they make a molecule. Water is an example of a molecule, also known as H2O. That's two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom, represented here as a ball and stick model. The gas that I'm breathing out right now, that's carbon dioxide, known as CO2. That's another molecule shown here as a space-filling model composed of one carbon and two oxygen atoms. Some molecules get really big, like sugar, with the chemical formula C6H12O6. Sugar is an example of a macromolecule. Macromolecules include carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. We split them into 4 groups because they're made of different, smaller molecules that give them different properties. So they deserve a whole separate video of explanation. Now, many molecules and macromolecules will come together to assemble a more complex level that includes organelles. I like to think of organelles as cute, tiny organs, or organs for the cell. They're structures found within cells with specified functions. The mitochondrion is an example of one type of organelle, known as the mighty mitochondrion, because it's the powerhouse of the cell. Its function is to produce energy. The nucleus is another organelle that some cells have. It's usually drawn as a big old sphere in diagrams, and this is where the very valuable, very important genetic information is housed. So the nucleus uses genetics to control the cell's activities. There are lots of other organelles that perform other very important specified functions within the cell. Now, the next level of complexity is the cell itself. This level is super important because the cell is the smallest fundamental unit of life. Life starts at the level of the cell. Atoms were the smallest fundamental unit of matter, but again, life starts with cells. Everything less complex than a cell, biologists don't even consider living. There's still some discussion about it, but this is why viruses, by definition, are not living. Viruses are often less complex than cells, and they typically depend on cells to function. In other words, they're not as cool as us. Some organisms consist of one single cell. They are known as unicellular organisms because they're one-celled organisms. Bacteria are an example of unicellular organisms. A bit of an aside, but just as important, unicellular organisms can be classified as prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Prokaryotic cells, or prokaryotes, do not have the organelle known as the nucleus or any other membrane-bound organelles. Prokaryote literally means before the nut or nucleus because these types of cells existed before the nucleus was even a thing. Bacteria are prokaryotic unicellular cells. Yeast, on the other hand, a type of fungus, are unicellular, but they are eukaryotic cells or eukaryotes. Eukaryote means true nut or true nucleus because yeast cells have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Now, multicellular organisms are all eukaryotes. Multicellular organisms are composed of more than one cell, like plants and animals, but we're not ready to talk about the whole organism quite just yet. When a lot of cells come together to perform a specialized function, they create what's known as tissue. Muscle is a type of tissue where a group of cells are working together to cause contractions. Your body is composed of muscle, connective, nervous, and epithelial tissue. Going into depth about tissues would probably require another video. You may hear the word tissue at the doctor's office. For example, if you were concerned about an abnormal mole or skin lesion as it relates to cancer, to test for possible cancer, your doctor will need more than just one cell. They will likely take a tissue sample of the area where many cells are collected. Next level. Different types of tissue can come together to form the next more complex level of life, the organ. Organs are composed of multiple tissues, and they also have a specified function. Humans have organs like our heart, our lungs, and liver. Plants also have organs, like their leaves, their stems, and their roots. Just like previous levels of life, multiple organs will come together to make an organism, at least the multicellular organism. Any individual living thing is considered an organism. The properties of what makes something living will be discussed in another video. A plant is an organism, and so is a red panda, and so is your dog, and so are you. The next level of life has a few conditions. A population includes all the organisms of one species in a given area. If you went to a forest and you counted all the sugar pine trees within a half-mile radius, that's an example of a population. If you went to a country and counted all of the people within that country, that is another example of a population. That's what the census does every 10 years in the US. It counts the number of humans living within that area of a country. The next level is called a community. A community includes all the populations of all different species in a particular area. If you think about your own neighborhood, your own community, and counted all of the people, their pets, the trees on their lawns, the grass, the insects, and all other living things in that area, that makes up a community. The community does not include non-living things like cars or buildings. Now, the ecosystem level is a bit different. The ecosystem includes all living and non-living things in a particular area. Sometimes you'll see the terms biotic, that just means living, and abiotic means non-living things in a particular area. When you think of an ecosystem, you want to include the plants, the sand, the water, the fish, the birds, and the air. Examples of ecosystems include the biotic and abiotic components of a desert or a rainforest or the tundra. The last level in the hierarchy of life is the biosphere. The biosphere includes all living and non-living things on this planet Earth. When you go through the least complex to the more complex levels of life, different properties will emerge. These emergent properties are due to interactions at lower levels. For example, the property of life at the cellular level. It depends on organelles performing their different specific functions. And this goes deeper than life. A bike is useful for transportation, but the pedal or the wheel by themselves, they ain't gonna take you very far. They have to work together so that the bike on a more complex level can function as transport. There's actually a field of biology called systems biology that studies how these different levels of organization interact with one another. Systems biologists can study how certain molecules like melatonin affect the sleep-wake cycle, or how increasing carbon dioxide affects ecosystems or the biosphere. It's actually a pretty cool field where you can ask some really interesting questions.